She had the mitten back on her left hand and was holding her father's sleeve with her right, watching Voss with the frank, uncomplicated attention of a child who has not yet learned that staring is rude. She had dark eyes and a small gap between her front teeth, and she was wearing a backpack shaped like a tortoise shell that was almost as wide as she was. Voss looked at her, and the girl said, "Your coat is the same color as my teacher's car," and then turned and followed her father to a bench along the far wall of the terminal without waiting for a response. Voss ordered a replacement coffee she did not want, stood at the pickup window and watched the man settle the girl onto the bench and open the backpack and produce a paperback book with a broken spine, which he handed to her. Then he sat beside her with his own coffee and did not look at his phone. He simply sat. Voss had not seen a person simply sit in a public space without a screen in longer than she could remember. She took her coffee to the opposite row of seats and opened her laptop and told herself she was not watching him. She was watching him. He read a folded section of newspaper. The girl read her book. When the girl turned a page, he turned one too. They were not speaking, but they were doing the same thing at the same moment, in the particular unplanned synchrony of two people who have spent a great deal of time together in small spaces. The ferry announcement came at 7:40. Voss closed her laptop and joined the boarding line. The man and the girl were 4 people ahead of her. When the girl's backpack snagged on the turnstile, he freed it with 2 fingers and one motion without interrupting whatever thought he was apparently having. And the girl walked through and took his hand on the other side, and they moved down the gangway together. Voss watched the back of the canvas jacket until the crowd closed around it. The coffee stain had already gone dark and invisible in the fabric. She thought about the card he had not taken and then made herself stop thinking about it, and did not entirely succeed. The offices of Malone Capital occupied the 14th and 15th floors of the Eastwick building on Harbour Street, and Voss arrived at 8:22, which was 8 minutes later than she intended and 22 minutes earlier than anyone else. She set her bag on the long table in the corner office that had been her father's and was now hers, and she opened the acquisition file that had been sitting at the top of her priority queue for 6 days. The company was called Ardwell Marine Systems, mid-sized, privately held, based out of the ferry district near the waterfront. They made navigational and load distribution software for commercial shipping vessels, and their core patent portfolio was the reason Malone Capital wanted them, or rather, the reason Voss's father had wanted them before his cardiac event in September had moved the decision to her desk. She had reviewed the financials 3 times. Clean books, low overhead, a skeleton staff of 9, and a founder whose name appeared on every core patent, but who had been functionally absent from company operations for the better part of 3 years. The file listed him as a silent partner. A note in her father's handwriting in the margin of the term sheet said simply, "Find him." She had not found him. Her research team had produced a home address in the ferry district, a registered vehicle, and no photographs more recent than 4 years old. She pulled up the older photograph now. She had looked at it before. A man at a maritime conference, standing at a presentation board, younger, jacket and tie, leaner in the jaw. She looked at it for longer than she had the previous times. Then she closed the file. She opened it again. She looked at the photograph again. She thought about a canvas jacket and exact change, and a child with a tortoise-shell backpack. She thought about the way he had looked at her card, already knowing he would not take it. She picked up her phone and called her head of research and asked for the current address again and whether there was any record of a child. His name was Callum Vare. The research file said he was 39, that he had completed a doctoral program in maritime systems engineering at a university in Scotland, that he had founded Ardwell Marine Systems 11 years ago on a provisional patent and a rental agreement for a converted boat shed on the South Pier, and that he had stepped back from active leadership in the company 32 months ago following the death of his wife. The child's name was Petra. She was 7. She attended Eastwick Primary on the north side of the Ferry District, and she was in her 2nd year there. Voss read this section of the file twice. Then she set her phone face down on the desk and looked at the harbour through the window for a while. The light on the water was low and flat, the particular pale grey of a November morning that cannot decide if it intends to rain. She had a board presentation at 10 and a call with outside counsel at 2, and a dinner she had been rescheduling for 3 weeks at 7. She opened her calendar and moved the dinner again. She did not examine why. She told her assistant she would be walking to the Ferry District at noon and that she did not need a car. Her assistant, who had been with the firm for 11 years and had developed a precise and reliable instinct for when not to ask questions, said she would hold the afternoon slot. Voss put on her coat at 12 and walked 14 blocks south through the cold. The Ferry District smelled of salt water and diesel and something faintly metallic that she associated with working docks and open machinery. The converted boat shed sat at the end of Pier 7. The signage on the door was small and painted directly onto the wood. Ardwell Marine Systems, in letters the colour of old brass. She stood outside for a moment. A seagull moved along the piling beside her and regarded her with total indifference. She knocked. The woman who answered was in her 60s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and she looked at Voss with the calm, assessing expression of someone who has seen a great many people come to this door and has learned to read most of them in under 10 seconds. Her name, Voss would learn, was Dora, and she had been with the company since its 2nd year, and she held the title of Operations Coordinator, which in a 9-person company meant she held everything. She told Voss that Mr. Vere was not in the office. She said it pleasantly and in a tone that did not invite the follow-up question, and Voss, who usually asked the follow-up question regardless, found herself saying thank you and stepping back. She stood on the pier for a moment. The water moved against the pilings in small, rhythmic increments. She looked along the south side of the pier and saw, at the far end, a figure crouched beside a mooring cleat, doing something with a length of rope and a tool she couldn't name from this distance. The canvas jacket. She walked toward him. He heard her before she reached him, or perhaps felt the change in the boards under her heels, because he straightened before she arrived and turned. He looked at her with the expression of a man who is not surprised and has decided to wait and see what happens next. She told him she was from Malone Capital. She told him her name. She did not tell him she had walked into his back that morning and sent coffee down his jacket and that she had been thinking about it since. He looked at her for a moment and then looked at the cleat and then back at her. He said he knew who she was. She said she thought they should talk about Ardwell. He said he was busy. She looked at the rope in his hand, which he had not put down. She said she could come back. He said she could. He did not offer a time. She walked back along the pier and did not look behind her, and could not have explained why her heart was doing what it was doing inside her chest. She came back the following morning at 8, before the tide shifted, because the research file said he came in early on Thursdays. Dora opened the door and looked at her with an expression that contained, Voss thought, a fraction less wariness than the day before, which felt like progress. She was shown to a small room with a round table and 2 chairs and a window that looked directly onto the water. There was a coffee maker on a shelf that appeared to be extremely old and also extremely functional, and she thought about asking for a cup, and then did not. Callum came in 7 minutes later. He had the same jacket. He had a mug of his own coffee, and he did not offer to get her one, which she found she did not mind. He sat down across from her, and she set the acquisition proposal on the table between them, the executive summary only, 4 pages, no numbers on the first page. He did not look at it immediately. He looked at her. He said, "Your father came to see me in June." She had not known that. Her father had not put it in the file. She kept her face where it was. He said, "We talked for about an hour." He said, "I told him I wasn't selling." She asked what her father had said. Callum looked at the window for a moment. He said, "Your father asked me what it would take, and I told him the company wasn't the point." And he said he understood that. And then he sat there for a while. And then he said he'd send someone else. Voss was quiet. She thought about her father sitting in this room, in this chair, being told no and choosing to wait rather than escalate. She had not always known him to do that. Callum looked at the proposal but still did not touch it. He said, "What changed?" She said, "He had a cardiac event in September. He's recovering." She said it evenly. Callum nodded once. Not with sympathy exactly, or not only with sympathy. He looked at the proposal. He said, "I'll read it." He did not say he would sign it. She stood, and he stood. She put on her coat, and he walked her to the door and held it without making the gesture mean anything. And she stepped out into the cold morning air, and the seagull was back on the piling and regarded her again with total indifference. And she walked back toward the office with the strange and unfamiliar sensation of having been taken seriously without being given anything. Petra was at the office on Friday afternoon. Voss did not know this when she returned for the 3rd time, and she registered the fact with a specific quality of surprise, which was that it did not surprise her the way it should have. The girl was at the round table with a sheet of drafting paper and a set of coloured pencils, drawing something that involved a great deal of blue and what appeared to be a ship. Dora was at the desk in the outer room, working. Callum was in the back, visible through a glass partition, on a call. Dora told Voss he would be a few minutes and gestured to the round table, which was, Voss understood, the only available seating. She sat across from Petra. Petra looked up, looked at her pencils, selected a green one, and looked up again. "You're the lady from the ferry," she said. She said it without particular significance, the way she might observe that a window was open. Voss said yes. Petra said, "You spilled coffee on my dad's jacket." Voss said she had. Petra considered this and then returned to the drawing. After a moment she held it up. "It's a ship that can't get lost," she said. "Her father made it so it can't get lost." She said this with the precision of someone reporting a fact they have had occasion to report before, and not with boasting, but with a specific and simple pride that sat in the room quietly and did not require a response. Voss looked at the drawing. The ship was blue and the water was bluer, and there were lines coming off it in all directions, like the drawing of a compass rose she had seen once in an old atlas in her father's study. She said it was very good. Petra said thank you and chose a different pencil. Callum came in from the back and saw them at the table and paused for 1/2 second that Voss caught and filed. He sat down beside his daughter and looked at the drawing and said something to her in a low voice that Voss didn't catch, and Petra laughed with her gap-toothed smile and added a seagull to the drawing in yellow, which was not the colour seagulls were, but was the colour she chose, and neither of them questioned it. Voss watched his hands on the table. Callum Vere had not looked at the acquisition proposal she had left with him the day before. He had not called. He had told her father in June that the company was not the point, and she was beginning, sitting at this round table with a child drawing an unsinkable ship in the wrong colours, to understand what he had meant. It was Dora who told her about the patent dispute. She did not tell her directly. She mentioned it in the way people mention things they want heard but cannot say plainly, folding it into a conversation about the company's history that Voss had not asked for and did not interrupt. The dispute had begun 26 months ago. A firm called Meridian Navigation Holdings had filed a challenge to the foundational patent on Ardwell's core load distribution algorithm, claiming prior development by a subsidiary they had acquired in a distressed sale in 2019. The claim was, in Dora's words, constructed, but it was not unsophisticated, and it had cost Ardwell 14 months of legal fees and the attention of its founder at the precise period when the company should have been scaling. Voss asked who was behind Meridian. Dora wiped down the counter she had already wiped down and said the controlling interest was held by a man named Garrett Lowe, who had been on the board of a shipping consortium that Ardwell had declined to partner with 3 years before the dispute was filed. She said this to the counter and not to Voss. Voss sat with it. That evening she called her head of research from the car and asked for everything on Meridian Navigation Holdings and Garrett Lowe, and any connection between Lowe and the shipping consortium and any communications that might have passed through the consortium's legal team. She did not say why. She looked out the car window at the harbour lights on the water. She thought about a 9-person company with clean books and a founder who had stepped back 32 months ago, which was almost exactly when the dispute was filed. And she thought about the kind of man who steps back rather than fights, and the kind of man who files a constructed claim against that exact kind of man, and the arithmetic of it settled in her chest with a specific cold clarity. She told the driver to go around the block instead of straight to the building. She needed another minute. She did not examine what she needed the minute for. The research came back in 48 hours. Garrett Lowe had been a minority stakeholder in 2 of the firms whose patents Meridian had later absorbed. The shipping consortium's legal team shared a billing address with the firm that had filed Meridian's challenge. There was a financial trail, not clean but navigable, and Voss's team had navigated it. She brought the file to Callum on a Tuesday morning without calling ahead, because she had stopped calling ahead, and Dora let her in without the pause of the first visit, which was the thing Voss had started measuring. She set the file on the round table. Callum looked at it. He did not look at her. He opened it to the 3rd page, which was the page with the billing address correlation, and he sat still for a long time. His hands were flat on the table. Petra was not there, and the office was quiet. He turned to the 6th page. Then he closed the file. He looked at the window. He said, "I know." She waited. He said, "I've known since month 4 of the dispute." She asked why he hadn't moved on it. He was quiet. Then he said, "Because moving on it meant being here instead of somewhere else. And for a long time, somewhere else was more important." She understood this without asking him to explain it, and she did not ask him to explain it. She asked what he needed. He said a firm with no connection to the shipping sector who could file a counter-challenge on the prior art grounds. He said it as though he had known the sentence for a long time and simply hadn't said it yet. She said she knew a firm in Edinburgh. She said she could make a call that afternoon. He looked at her then, directly at her, the way he had done very few times, and the look was not gratitude exactly, or not only gratitude. She held it for one moment and then looked at the file. She said she would need access to the original development records, time-stamped, to establish the prior art chain. He said he had them. He said they were in a hard drive in the boat shed and that no one had asked for them before. She said she was asking now. He stood, and she stood. and they walked together into the back room for the first time, and the afternoon light came through the south window in a long, flat plane and lit the surface of the water visible through the glass, and neither of them said anything about any of it, and both of them understood all of it. The counter-challenge was filed on a Thursday, 17 days after Voss made the call to Edinburgh. Meridian's legal team had 3 weeks to respond and did not respond substantively, which told Voss what she had already suspected, that the challenge had always been a pressure instrument rather than a winnable argument, and that Garrett Lowe had calculated Callum Vere would not fight it. He had calculated correctly for 26 months. Then a woman in a good coat had walked into a boat shed on Pier 7, and the calculation had stopped being correct. The Patent Board's preliminary ruling came back on a Friday afternoon in favour of Ardwell, pending formal hearing, which was the outcome that mattered. Voss was in her office when the email came through. She read it twice and then called Edinburgh and thanked them, and then sat in her father's chair and looked at the harbour for a while. She did not call Callum. She did not know quite what she would say. That evening she walked to the ferry district alone, without her briefcase, and she went to the end of Pier 7 and stood at the water. The pilings were dark and cold, and the harbour smelled of salt and winter. After a while she heard the boards shift behind her. He stood beside her at the rail. Not close. He had a coffee, and he was not holding it like it was warm. He had heard. She did not ask how. He said, "You didn't have to go to Edinburgh." She said she knew that. He was quiet. She looked at the water. She said, "My father's note in the acquisition file said find him. I thought he meant find the founder." She paused. She said, "I think he meant find the person." Callum said nothing for a long time. The harbour moved beneath them. Then Petra came around the corner of the boat shed at a small run, tortoise-shell backpack swinging, calling her father's name, and she stopped when she saw Voss and looked between them with the expression of a child who has a theory. She walked to the rail and took a place between them and put one hand in her father's and looked up at Voss with the direct and simple gravity of someone about to say an important thing. "You should come to dinner," she said. Not as a question. As a conclusion she had already reached. Callum looked at the water. The corner of his mouth moved. He said, "You don't have to." Voss looked at the girl, and then at the man, and then at the water was dark, and the lights of the harbour were on it, and the cold air moved between them, and she said, "What are you making?" Petra said, "Pasta, we always make pasta." She said it in the tone of someone announcing an excellent fact. Voss said, "All right." They walked off the pier together, the 3 of them in the cold November evening, the girl between them, and Callum did not say anything else, and neither did Voss, and the boards were even under their feet, and the light from the boat shed fell in a long, warm rectangle across the water, and for the first time in a very long time, Voss Malone walked somewhere without knowing exactly where she was going, and found that this did not trouble her at all.